Hello friends and welcome to the first entry of the how-to series, starting off with the tanks and starting off with Warrior. Let's quickly go over what Warrior is. Warrior is a tank and it probably is the strongest tank in the game currently when it actually comes to tanking capabilities. It is more or less impossible to kill. If you want to be an absolute unstoppable killing machine, then Warrior is probably the way to go. You literally cannot die as this job as long as you play it right. In this video, we're going to go over the skills, starting with the offensive skills, onto the defensive skills, finishing off with the utility skills. Then we will move on to an opener and a rotation sort of priority system, just giving you a breakdown of how that all works. After which I'm going to show you a few little examples of what you should be doing in a dungeon or a dungeon boss, for example, which you can apply to trials. We're not going to show trials because trials are spoilers and I don't want to show spoilers. But for the most part, you should have an understanding of how you should be starting a actual raid trial fight in the opener and rotation part of the video. The dungeon part is just a simple breakdown of how to play in a dungeon and some things to take note of when you're playing Warrior. Then we will finish the video off with a stat breakdown, how the stats work on Warrior, what our priority is with a Warrior and the stats, and just gearing in general. So without further ado, let's just dive right in, starting with the skills. Warrior has its standard basic single target attacks, heavy swing, maim, Storm's Path and Storm's Eye. You want to keep Storm's Eye up as much as possible as it gives you a buff, Surging Tempest, and you want to keep this buff up as much as possible. More on that on the opener rotation part, as we can explain how all this works when we're going over that sort of footage. Also, a really important note is Warrior uses the Beast Gauge. This gauge can be charged up by using its single target and AoE GCDs, and the Beast Gauge fills up and you can use the Beast Gauge to use Fell Cleaves and Decimates. Really important stuff that you are using these, making sure you are saving as much gauge as possible for raid buffs from your party members. Let's move on to the AoE rotation. So all you'll be doing is spamming Overpower and Mithril Tempest when it comes to the GCD, making sure you're only doing this on 3 or more targets, no less than that. Do not AoE with only 2 targets, it is not worth it. Then we have Tomahawk. This is our standard pull attack. Make sure we're using this when we're pulling a boss or pulling mobs in a dungeon, stuff like that. Then we have Onslaught. This is our gap close and we get 3 stacks of Onslaught, really handy stuff. And also making sure that when we're in a raid instance that we're saving and holding onto as many of these as possible for raid buffs, but never staying at 3 for too long, and maybe sometimes keeping 1 in reserve for when we need to peel off the boss and go back to it. Next we have Berserk / Inner Release. Berserk is kind of bad as basically it'll just make 3 attacks crit, but don't worry about that. That's only before we get Inner Release. Once we get Inner Release, Berserk becomes Inner Release and it becomes really good. So basically what we want to do with Inner Release is when we use it, we'll be able to use 3 Fell Cleaves or 3 Decimates or whatever, any mixture, and it's going to guarantee crit direct hit every single one of these. So this is on the 60-second cooldown as well, and it's really good to just use off CD and making sure we're just getting maximum usage of this ability. A side note about Decimate, same with Mithril Tempest and Overpower. We only want to use this on 3 targets or more, never any less than 3 targets. Remember, this is very handy to know. Moving on to Upheaval and Origeny. Upheaval is just an OGCD single target. It does a lot of potency, as you can see. Origeny is basically Upheaval but AoE. Remember, only use this on 3 targets. Pretty much a reoccurring theme with AoE on pretty much all classes. Then we have Infuriate. When we use Infuriate, it's going to give us access to Inner Chaos and Chaotic Cyclone, and what that does is basically upgrades Fell Cleave or Decimate to those skills respectively. And again, same rule here, never use Chaotic Cyclone unless it's 3 or more targets. And also another side note is never use Infuriate with Inner Release, because this is going to overwrite our Inner Release stacks and it's going to waste a Fell Cleave, and that's just really bad and it's going to really impact our damage. So making sure we're not doing that, we're making sure that we use it either before or after Inner Release, never during. And then we've got Primal Rend. So Primal Rend is tied to Inner Release. Every time we use Inner Release we get access to Primal Rend. Primal Rend is really good. It's always a crit direct hit. It won't use a stack of our Inner Release. It's gap closer and it also does AoE, so it's our hardest hitting attack and it's really good. Just making sure we're not using this in a bad situation. Say if we need to use it and we're going to jump into an AoE, make sure we're not doing this as it can get us hurt, make us eat a Von stack that we don't want to eat. That will do it for all the offensive skills. Let's move on to the mitigation and utility now. So we'll start a Thriller Battle. Thriller Battle is just going to give us 20% more health. It's also going to heal that amount, and it's also going to make us heal for 20% more via healing actions. This is affected by Equilibrium, so perfectly tying into Equilibrium here. When we use Thriller Battle, we can use then Equilibrium. This is going to give us a big heal. The hot from Equilibrium will not be affected by Thriller Battle, but the initial heal from Equilibrium will, so that is pretty good overall. Then we have Vengeance. Every tank tank has a big CD, and this is our big CD. It's 30% mitigation every 120 seconds for 15 seconds. Pretty good overall, good for tank busters, good for filler damage even, depending on the situation. Then we have Holmgang, absolutely busted ability. It is our invulnerability. We cannot die when we use Holmgang in that last 10 seconds. So if we're about to die, we can pop Holmgang. We'll be at 1 health. We'll never die for a whole 10 seconds. Gives the healer plenty of time to heal us through. Good tank buster cheese as well. So keep that in mind. Holmgang is probably the best invulnerability in the game. It's on a really short cooldown, as you can see as well. 240 seconds, really good stuff. Then we have Rampart, 20% less damage taken every 90 seconds, 20 seconds. Pretty good, really good filler. Also good for tank busters, stuff like that. Make sure you're fully utilizing this and getting full usage. And then we've got our last defensive, and then we're going to move on to utility. Utility won't take us that long, but our last defensive here is Bloodwedding. As you can see from the tooltip, this is absolutely absurd. Probably the most broken ability in the game currently. Initially, for the whole 8 seconds, it's going to have a 10% mitigation on us. And also for the whole 8 seconds, every time we use an attack, we will get a heal of 400 potency. This works really well with Infuriate and Primal Rend, by the way, because it will always guarantee a critical heal, which is big heals. On top of that, it grants Stem the Flow. Now, Stem the Flow is going to give us 10% more mitigation for the first 4 seconds of using this, so 20% more mitigation for the first 4 seconds of this buff. So really good for tank busters just before they're about to go out. Also Stem the Tide. This is just a barrier for 400 potency. It's not the best thing in the world, but it's a nice little cherry on top for such a powerful ability already. Moving on to utility, and we'll start off with Nascent Flash. Nascent Flash is literally bloodwetting, but you can put it on another target rather than yourself, and you'll still get the benefit of the self-healing from bloodwetting as well. You just won't get all the mitigations and shields and stuff like that. That will go to the target instead. So think of it as just bloodwetting, but on a target of yours. So really good for your other tank when they need to take a tank buster, or maybe you're tanking at the same time. Then putting this on them and also getting the benefit of the self-heal is super duper good. So I do really think both of these skills are just amazing. Then we have Shake It Off. This is our raid-wide barrier, really good for just mitigating damage when a raid-wide AoE is coming out or whatever. Also, if we use Thriller Battle, Vengeance, or Bloodwedding, it adds 2% more to the shield. This is not really worth to do. I wouldn't really keep it in mind too much. Maybe if Bloodwedding is 1 second and we use Shake or Thrill or Vengeance, whatever, right? And it's literally the last second, then that's a nice little cherry on top. But otherwise, don't think about this too much. It's honestly not worth doing or breaking your back over. Then we have Reprisal. This is an AoE, reduced damage dealt by nearby enemies by 10%. Very small AoE, but it's going to reduce everything in that little radius by 10% less damage. So it's good mitigation for raid wides, or even good mitigation for tank busters or dungeon packs and stuff like that. It's really good overall. It's a good ability. Really do like it. We've got Interject. This is just a silence. Make sure we're using this when we're silencing enemies. Low Blow. This is a stun, so we can stun enemies, stuff like that. These stuff won't be too good in raids. Interject might be pretty good in raids when a cast is going to be interrupted. Then use this. Very good. As for Low Blow, that's pretty good in dungeons, but usually not so viable in raids. But do keep it on your hotbar just in case you do need to stun something in a raid. Can happen. Provoke. This is just a tank swap ability, or to peel a mob off someone else who has aggro who isn't meant to. So just make sure we're utilizing this when we need to grab aggro really quickly, or tank swap. Which leads me into Shirk. This is basically when a tank provokes off you and you're the other tank, then make sure you're shirking them, and then this is going to make the tank swap as smooth as possible because it's going to give 25% of your enmity to that other tank. Then we have Arm's Length. This is going to give us an anti-knockback, but it's also a really good tank dungeon CD. So when we're in a dungeon and we've got a lot of mobs, using this CD is pretty great because it's going to give all the mobs a slow. And that slow is just mitigation because it's going to make them attack 20% slower. So pretty good overall. And last but not least, we have Defiance. This is our tank stance. We want to switch this on when we're actively tanking and off when we're not actively tanking. Although it might not be a bad idea to keep it on while you're off tanking, because if you shirk during a tank swap, then honestly you probably won't even need to worry about catching up on the aggro to your other tank. That's all the skills and how they work. Let's move on to the opener and rotation now, just to really make all of this that I've just explained about all the offensives really fall into place and make sense for you guys. Once we've done that, we'll move on to some gameplay footage and I'll just basically explain some usage of defensives because I feel like that is super important to do too. So moving on, let's go into the opener now. Okay, so first we have the opener and rotation. We start with Tomahawk here because we are a warrior and we're most likely going to be main tanking. We then use Infuriate straight away because we want to get us off CD as soon as possible. We then want to use Inner Chaos just after we've used Potion and Storm's Eye, and then Inner Release And we're going to either use Primal Rend and then spam Fell Cleaves, or spam Fell Cleaves and then Primal Rend right at the end. Either way, it doesn't matter. As long as your Primal Rend is under raid buffs, you'll be fine. Just making sure your Primal Rend is under raid buffs is super duper important. Obviously, weaving onslaughts in between, because this is also important. It's important to weave these onslaughts and make sure they're also under the raid buffs of your other party members. And then once all this is done, making sure we are keeping our onslaughts at 2 or less stacks, never capping at 3, because we don't want to cap 3 stacks of onslaught, because this is just a waste of damage and we don't want that. And of course, when more raid buffs come up, that's when we want to use our onslaughts. And if we want to play it safe, we know the boss is going to disengage us or has a chance to disengage us, then maybe hold 1 onslaught in reserve for that situation. You'll also notice that we try and keep Storm's Eye here at above 30 seconds. This is just because it's a dummy, and you may as well when it comes to a dummy. When it comes to a real fight, you might be using Storm's Paths more than you're using Storm's Eyes. I mean, for the majority you will be, but I'm using more Storm's Eyes in this footage here because it's just, yeah, it's a dummy like I said, and I may as well keep it up for as much as possible. It's quite a simple rule to follow. Just make sure that if the boss is going to go away or whatever, then maybe do some more Storm's Paths, opt in for more Storm's Paths. If your Storm's Eye runs out during the downtime of the boss, that's absolutely fine. You can just get it back up again when the boss comes back down. But we really do want to just try and get as many Storm's Paths as possible, because this is just a lot. It's going to mean more Fell Cleaves. Something about Fell Cleaves as well is we want to hold as many Fell Cleaves as we can in reserve for raid buffs as well. Same goes for Infuriate. We want to hold these for raid buffs from other party members, because that's where our damage really shines. Making sure we're never overcapping our Beast Gauge to 100, or making sure we're never overcapping our Infuriates either. So we can use them without raid buffs, that's fine, as long as we're not overcapping, but ideally we'll want them with raid buffs. Now I'm just going to show you a quick pull here. I'm doing a full pull on the Stigma Dreamscape here, as you can see. And what we do is we use Bloodweighting straight away. We use an Inner Chaos. We make sure we've got our Mithril Tempest up to get our Surging Tempest. And we're basically spamming our AoEs here. And we're getting so much self-healing from the Bloodweighting. And then once that's over, we can pop Vengeance. Or we pop Vengeance in conjunction with Bloodweighting. And then when we need a little bit more healing just to finish off the pack off, we can pop a Frill, and then we can pop an Equilibrium. This is pretty much going to mean that the healer will not have to heal us at all throughout this whole mob pack. And our DPS is going to be so high because, you know, you have 2 DPS, maybe you have a healer healing, and you're also a warrior and you're doing absurd amount of damage on an AoE pack that probably by the time you need to pop another cooldown, it's a Bloodweighting is going to be back up and you can just use that again, or the mob pack will be dead. Let's quickly move on to a boss as well. There isn't too much to talk about when it comes to a boss, but you'll see this indicator here. This always means that it's a tank buster, so just make sure you're popping your CDs here, and Bloodweighting is just absolutely amazing. As you can see, no damage. Warrior is just a meme. Like, it's so broken. But yeah, that's some examples of dungeon gameplay and just how you should be mitigating, really. You know how to do damage because we've been over that in the opener rotation, but this is just some examples of mitigation and stuff like that. Just remember to use your cooldowns and build some muscle memory for when you're going to use these cooldowns. Try and sort of figure out a cooldown rotation when you're going into trial fights. You know, can you get away with this many ramparts, this many vengeances before a tank buster? Do you need any more CDs other than Bloodweighting for a tank buster? Just think about all this stuff when you're doing tanks on trials and stuff like that, because it will just come in handy to know your kit as a tank and just fully and effectively use it. For instance, if there is a trial where a tank buster comes out and then you need to tank swap, you probably don't actually need to pop that many cooldowns as long as you live through the initial hit, and then maybe you can just make do with Bloodweighting and pop your other cooldowns in as filler, because as long as you survive the initial hit, you're not going to take any more damage after that point. So let's go into the gearing and the stat priority. So hopefully in the background footage there will be me browsing through the vendors and stuff, showing you some gear, blurring out any spoilers and stuff like that along the way. But as I'm scrolling, the other me is scrolling through all the gear and stuff like that. Let me just talk to you about what you should be going for when it comes to gear. So as a warrior, your main priority is crit, and as much crit as you can get, and nothing but crit. So when it comes to gear, go for all the gear that has crit. And if you have gear that doesn't have crit, or you have gear that has crit but not max crit, then meld crit in. And if you can't meld any more crit in, or you can't go for any other pieces which have crit, you want to go for Determination next. Determination is your second biggest and major stat. If you cannot do any more crit, then you go Determination. Also, skill speed is really important for it as well, to a certain threshold. So in a way, you could actually prioritize skill speed over Determination because you want to meet a threshold. So you want your GCD to be 2.47 or 2.45 depending on ping, and this will basically come into play when we use Bloodwedding. When we use Bloodwedding, we want to use it as our second OGCD, so we want to use it later into the GCD recast. So we're going to get 4 GCDs with our Bloodwedding and really maximize our healing efficiency. Also, it comes into play with Potion as well, and again, this is ping related, so if you have a bit of a higher ping, maybe go for 2.45 recast time rather than the 2.47. But as long as you've met that threshold, go Determination all the way. If you can't meld any more crit or Determination, then the next two things are Tenacity or Direct Hit. Now, it's still a bit of a debate between which one is better at the moment. I think a lot of warriors at the least are thinking about going Tenacity over Direct Hit. Direct Hit is actually pretty bad for us, really. But I don't think there's going to be a huge difference between melding Direct Hit or Tenacity, because I think Direct Hit is still semi-decent on the other tanks over Tenacity, but Tenacity's a little bit better on Warrior, I believe, because Direct Hit doesn't really get much of a benefit for Warrior. But as I've said, this meld honestly is up to personal preference. Do you want the extra Direct Hit maybe to benefit more tanks across your board, or go Tenacity, have the more raw damage kind of thing rather than the Direct Hit chance? A bit more mitigation as well and a bit more healing. It's very minimal, but it is a thing, so that is up to you for the last stat. That is between Tenacity and Direct Hit, so whatever one you fancy and you prefer, then go for that one. And that will conclude my how-to warrior guide. This might have been a bit of a longer one, but hopefully I've kept it as short as possible and as informative as possible, as I really just want to nail every single point that I have in this video, as I think it's really important to just get all this information out there. If you liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up. That would really help me a bunch, really motivate me to keep doing the series. I do want to commit to this series because it's quite an exciting series to make for me. I do look forward to moving on to the other roles and leveling them and gaining all the experience that I need from all those other roles too, so I do look forward to that as well. If you like the content in general and you want to see more of this, then do hit me with a subscribe. Again, that would also really help me a bunch to make all these series, to get all this series out. I have fully committed to them, but it would just give me a bit more motivation. If you think I've missed anything, or let me know how you find Warrior, put it in the comments below. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. It is an absolutely overtuned class at the moment and I love it. My favorite job right now, so I really do enjoy it. I'd love to hear what you guys think of Warrior in this expansion as well in the comments below. And with that said, I will end the video here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy, stay safe, we out, peace.